This is the final video lecture for Symbolic Logic, Introduction to Symbolic Logic, Philosophy 202. I will try to keep this as brief as I can. The things I want to do sort of to cover are these four. The very first thing I just want to say is a huge thank you. You have been an absolutely amazing class of students, and it is extremely unfortunate that we got so side-railed or derailed with COVID. So thank you for those who continue to work really, really hard in this course. It has been a pleasure teaching you. I want to cover a few things about the final exam instructions, just to make sure that we're not going to get caught up in any type of technical issues, since we have to do all of this online. And then I'm going to give you a proof that Santa exists. It'll illustrate the importance of doing translations, and then I'll say a little bit about advanced logic. If you're not so interested in part 3 about some proof for how Santa exists or advanced logic, you don't need to watch those parts. So let me get to some instructions for the final exam. So I'm going to briefly go share the BB Learn screen. There we go. Okay, so on BB Learn, you'll find under the section called Final Exam, you'll see the instructions for the final exam right here. Please make sure to read these instructions carefully. There are going to be 3 different sections, one that focuses on translations, one that just focuses on logical concepts, particularly those related to the quantifiers, and then the 3rd section is going to be on the proofs. The first 2 sections, translations and logical concepts, are going to require you to submit files specifically to me. So for the translations part, you'll see that I'm asking you to download the file called Bert's Sentences. So if you go back into the final exam section, you'll see here that there's a file called Bert Baumgartner's Sentences. When you click on that, some of your browsers will give you the option to try to open it immediately, but then it won't be able to do that because it doesn't know what application it belongs to. So what you need to do when you click it and it downloads, so for me, it downloads it into a specific folder. What I need to go do is go to that specific downloads folder. And what I do is I copy or cut and paste it into a separate folder that I've created for my own final exam. And then what I do is open up Tarski's World, and then using Tarski's World, navigate to that folder and open it up in Tarski's World. So double clicking on the file itself won't work because your computer or your browser is not going to know what application is appropriate for that. So again, you're going to want to download it, save it to a particular location, then open up Tarski's World, and then open up the file inside Tarski's World. Right, and so what you should then actually see is a, just give me one moment here. I just need to switch screens. Okay, there we go. So what you'll see is a sentence file that you should be able to access using Tarski's World. And what I have below each of these sections is the English sentence that I want you to translate. So here, this says B has a large cube to its left. So for the first translation, you can then use Tarski's World, right, to do the translation. So you might say, there exists an X. This is giving you a bit of a clue how to start this, and translate the rest of the sentence. There are 17 sentences in total. They increase roughly in difficulty. The first half are with single quantifiers, and then the second half are going to be when you're using multiple quantifiers, and sometimes even mixed quantification. Okay, so that's for the first section. Let me go back to the browser. So the next section is focusing on logical concepts. What I need you to do is create a Word file, or if you use Pages, if you use Mac, or something else. If you use Google Docs, that's also fine, but I need you to not just provide me the link. I need you to actually download the document itself and email me the document as well, so that I have the document on hand. So what you need to do is do not forget your name. That's really important. So put your name at the top of the file. And then there's going to be several questions that sometimes have separate subparts. So for the first question, there are 5 sentences here labeled A through E. And I need you to tell me, is that sentence a tautology? Is it a first order validity? Is it a logical truth? Or is it not a logical truth at all? And the most important part is not just identifying what they are, but explain why. Why is whatever the sentence that you've identified, why is it, say, a logical truth or not a logical truth at all? And what I'm asking you there is to rely on the definition of, say, what a logical truth is, and then connect it with the particular sentence here. So that way you're demonstrating that you actually know how to analyze these sentences, as opposed to just taking a stab in the dark. So I will give 0 points if you don't give an explanation, even if you end up getting it right by chance. Okay, question 2. There are going to be 4 different pairs of sentences, and you need to describe a situation that makes one of the sentences true and the other false. So let me just look at B, for example. Here, I've got a situation where you have, there exists an X, such that for all Y, X likes Y. And there exists an X for all Y, such that Y likes X. I need you to give me a described situation. Say, talk about 3 individuals. You might have A, B, and C. And you can say like A likes B, B likes C, but C does not like A, or something of that effect, right? So I want you to describe a situation where we can see that 1 is made true, but 2 is made false. And so you need to explain why 1 is made true and why 2 is made false in the situation that you've described. Make sure to label these as appropriate, right? So you might say in a file, right, you might call it Q2A, and then Q2A is then followed by the description and your explanation for why Q2A1 is true, but Q2A2 is false. Okay, and then the third question and the fourth question have to do with looking at 2 different arguments. One of them is going to be a valid argument, and one of them is going to be an invalid argument. For the one that is an invalid argument, I want you to provide a counterexample for me. So I want you to, again, provide a world like in Tarski's world and explain why the premise is made true, but the conclusion would be made false. Or in this case, if it's this one and that one, right? If the premise is true, then this conclusion is false. For the one that is valid, you'll notice that there are files that I'll talk about in a moment in BB-Learn where you will actually do proofs for the alternative argument. Okay, so that's question 3 and 4 that are part of section 2 under logical concepts. The third section and final section of the final exam are with proofs. There are going to be 10 of them in total. You're going to find all of these on BB-Learn. So under the final exam section, you'll see that there's a folder called proof files. Click on proof files and you'll see that there's going to be 10 different exercises. So exercise Baumgartner 13.3. You need to download each of these individually. Make sure to save them. So in the same way as you had to download the sentence file and then open it through Tarski's world, you have to do the same thing here. You're going to download the file, save it in a particular location, open up Fitch, and then from Fitch, you need to open up the sentence files wherever you've actually saved them. Your browsers are not going to be able to do this automatically because they don't know what type of file this is, and that Fitch is the one to open that up. So there's going to be 10 of them. Each of those files is a valid argument. You need to do a proof for it. You'll see that you are allowed to use TautCon and cite at most 2 sentences, but that's effectively it. So the rest of it, you need to provide each of the individual steps for. When you're done your proofs, make sure to save them as proof Baumgartner n.m, where n and m are the numbers. So if you are working on exercise Baumgartner 13.3, then you need to save it as proof Baumgartner 13.3.proof. And then save it as you would have any other type of exercise file that we've made. You'll then be able to submit it through GradeGrinder, but this is really, really important. You will not be able to submit it without clicking the Instructor 2 button. If you try, you'll get an error message. So you have to submit it, and you'll have to submit it using the Instructor 2 button. Full points if on your first submission, the proof is correct. Partial points if you need to submit once and then submit it a second time with corrections. So make sure that you have gotten the proof correct and that you're confident that you've gotten it correct before doing the submission to me. You'll be able to submit this at most twice. So make it count. None of these exercises are new in the sense that they have the same formal structure of questions that you've seen in previous problem sets. Okay, if you do have any questions, including how to interpret some of these things, some of those proofs, or if there's something that you're maybe perhaps stuck on, please don't hesitate to send me an email, and I can help guide you through that. Okay, now the next two things that I'd like to talk about, and these are more sort of for fun. So one, I just want to briefly talk about a proof that Santa exists, and then talk a little bit about what you might expect for an advanced logic course. So the proof that Santa exists. Let me show you in Fitch the following type of argument. So here are two premises. The first one says, if, so this is a conditional statement. So if it's not the case that Santa exists, then it's not the case that if B, so say B names me, that's Bert. So this antecedent says Bert asks for presents. And this consequent says Bert gets presents. So this conditional inside here says if Bert asks for presents, then Bert gets presents. This negation out here says that's not the case, right? So if Bert asks for presents, then he gets presents. That conditional is false. That's what that negation says out front. And it says that this sentence then is true, right? So the negated version is true if it's not the case that Santa exists. Look, if Santa doesn't exist, then it's not the case that if I ask for presents, then I get presents. That seems right. And 2 now says, you know what? Bert doesn't ask for presents. These two premises, if they're true, turn out to actually provide us with a proof that Santa exists. And the quickest way to check this is to use TOTCON, right? If I do TOTCON here from those two premises, it checks out. And I'll leave it as an exercise for you to think about how to actually do the sort of details of this proofs. But it'll turn out that you actually don't need to use any type of quantifiers to do this proof. The exercises that we did with conjunction, disjunction, negation, and the conditional, those introduction and elimination rules are actually all you need to be able to do this proof. So now you might ask that something's wrong in Fitch, or maybe something's wrong with logic. We should not be able to prove that Santa exists. The mistake has to do with not the logic, and in fact, not with premise 2, but actually with how we translate this idea that if Santa doesn't exist, then it doesn't matter whether or not I ask for presents, I still won't get any presents. There's actually something wrong with premise one, just the way that it's stated. Premise one is not true, or at the very least should not be a true characterization of this basic idea of what we're trying to express. That if Santa doesn't exist, then it's not the case that if I ask for presents, then I get presents. It has to do with the location of the negations, and in particular, the second negation. So I will leave it at that for those of you who are interested to try to suss out why exactly there's a mistake here, and if you put the negation somewhere else, that the proof, the proof that you end up developing won't work any longer. Okay, and the final thing that I just wanted to share a little bit with you is with respect to advanced logic. So there is at least one student that has expressed the desire to do advanced logic, and we have set up an independent or a directed study to be able to do that. There are going to be 4 more additional spots that I can take. The class is not allowed to have any more than 5 in it because it's not an official course, it's a directed study. So I would just want to spend a couple minutes just briefly telling you about what you might expect in that type of course. And if you're interested, still interested, to please send me an email within the next week to talk about whether this course would be right for you and how to go about signing up for that if there are spots still available. So here are some of the key things that that we will cover in an advanced logic course. We'll work specifically on what are called non-classical logics. So classical logic is the logic that we learned in this class. So we had the conjunction, disjunction, negation, the conditional, the biconditional, and then we had our 2 quantifiers, the existential and the universal quantifier. One of the things that we can't express using classical logic is to say things like it's possible or it's necessary that. We don't actually have features in first order logic the way that we've developed it to be able to express that. So if I want to say something like 1 + 1 is necessarily true, or it's necessary that 1 + 1 is equal to 2. I don't actually have a feature in my language to deal with what are called modal operators. That's to say, we've been able to use things like names and predicates, but to say that something is necessary or to say something is possible is actually not to use a predicate. These are actually different types of operators. Or as another example, Bert believes that 1 + 1 is equal to 2. Here we have another type of what we call a modal operator, believing. There is a proposition in here, right, or a sentence in here that has the identity predicate, and we're saying that 1 + 1 is identical to 2, right? So that itself is a sentence, but then there's these other features, this believing relation that is held to that proposition. And that's a different kind of relation than the predicate or property relation that we have talked about in this course. So we need to add another feature to our logic in order to be able to express these types of English sentences. And so that moves us into what's called modal logic. So that's one of the things that we would cover in the advanced logic class. Here's some other things that we would cover, and these are what really make non-classical logics the sort of non-classical parts. We have assumed in our class that every sentence is true or false. So in classical logic, every sentence is true or false, and not both. In non-classical logic, we explore a bunch of ways in which we might break those assumptions. So we might say, maybe some sentences are neither true nor false. So maybe some sentences are like half true. Or maybe, right, so we might say they're like true to 0.5 degrees. And so true is like a 1 and false is 0, and so half true is like 0.5 true. Or maybe we say that it's indeterminate. Like the future, right? If I say it's going to snow tomorrow, right? It's like there's no facts about today. Or if you think about, 3 years from now, right? There's no facts today that are going to make that sentence true or false, right? It just hasn't happened yet. It's in the future. And the future is open, and there is no fact of the matter to make a statement true or false, right? It's not until something has moved through the present and into the past where we can suddenly say, ah, yes, on April 3rd, it was sunny, right? There's some fact of the matter that has happened. So maybe because the future is indeterminate, we don't know yet whether, or there is no fact of the matter whether the sentence is true or false. And there are logics to be able to deal with that. And so that would be a type of logic that we would look at. Another type of logic is maybe some sentences are both true and false. Maybe there are what we call true contradictions. There are logics that sort of help systematize what would follow even if some contradictions were true. Remember, in classical logic, we avoided these things. I would say like the plague, but maybe that's a little too close to home at the moment. But yeah, we avoided contradictions. There are logics out there that say, maybe contradictions aren't so bad. What continues to follow, right? What other types of logics can we build if we allow for the possibility that a sentence could be true and false at the same time? So that gives you a brief sort of flavor of the types of things that we would cover in a non-classical logic. So if that is of interest to you, and you've actually enjoyed this logic class in a certain way, right? So non-classical logic, it's not that it gets any easier. It continues to be difficult. But if you enjoyed that type of challenge, then non-classical logics might be something that you're interested in doing. So again, email me if you're interested in that. I've got 4 slots left to fill that out as a directed study. Okay, thank you again for a fantastic class. I love teaching symbolic logic. If you have any comments or any feedback for me, again, please don't hesitate to email me or put these things in the course evaluations. Thank you again. All the best this summer, and please stay safe.